How's it going, guys? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com, and today I want to talk about multiband compression. When I was starting out, I really didn't get multiband compression. I would try throwing it on my master fader because I had seen other people do that, but I didn't really know what I was trying to achieve with it, and therefore I wasn't getting good results. Eventually I figured it out, so I just wanted to share some of the ways that I use multiband compression in my mixes to hopefully give you some ideas on how you can use it. And just a quick note, you could also use a dynamic EQ in most of these cases. I might make another video in the future about the differences between multiband compression and dynamic EQ. But just know that if you own a dynamic EQ plugin and not a multiband compressor, you can still do all the things we're going to talk about today. And really the reason why you would use either of these tools is pretty much the same thing. All right, so for our first example here, we're going to be looking at the bass. So I talked about this in one of my past videos where I was talking about getting a consistent low end in your mix, but I'll mention it again here. So here we're using the McDSP 6034 Ultimate Multiband Compressor. And this looks kind of funny for a multiband compressor. You're usually used to seeing something more like this. The only real difference is obviously the interface. And then for each one of the bands, so here's our low band, for instance, we can choose all different compressor types, like a Varimu or an LA2A or a DBX, or in this case, an 1176. So I really like this plugin just because those flavors are really fun to play with in a multiband setting, but the exact same principles apply whether you were using Wave C4 or FabFilter Pro MB or any other multiband compressor. So let's talk about what we're doing here on the bass. So we're only using 2 of the 4 bands. We've got one from 120 Hertz down and one between 1K and 15K. Let's bypass this higher band for a minute and just focus on the low end. So as I mentioned in that other video, for a big rock song like this, we want the low end of our bass to be super consistent. So by compressing just the low end independently from the rest of the signal, we're able to keep the low end super consistent, even if the bass part goes up to a higher note that doesn't have as much low end, or maybe the bass itself just wasn't set up very well and certain notes aren't as full as others. So let's take a look at what we got here. So this shows what I'm talking about really well. You can see that first note there, we were getting like maybe 3 decibels of gain reduction. And then the second note where it goes down to the lower string there, we were getting, I don't know, like 8, 10 maybe. So check that out again. But thanks to the multiband compressor, our low end is staying consistent. Let me just bypass that and see if you can hear the difference. And now with it in. Yeah, really big difference there. Hopefully you're listening on headphones or good speakers so you can hear that. But without the multiband compressor, in the context of the mix, when the bass plays that first higher note, our low end would just like disappear. So now let's take a look at this second band. This one is definitely less important and probably not super critical in this song. But like I said, this is looking at from 1K to 15K, so basically 1K and up, because we don't really have anything going on above 15K in our bass track here. But let's solo it up to see what this part of the compressor is listening to. So just all like the pick attack and the string noise and stuff like that. And really why I have this on here is just if there's any kind of random picks or squeaks or anything that are a little bit louder than everything else, it'll just duck them down. So you can see it doing it a little bit on that second note there. But again, in this song, there wasn't really anything too bad there. So this part of it wasn't super necessary. But other times this band will be really important. For our next example, let's take a look at our overheads. So again here, I'm using the McDSP multiband compressor, but obviously you can use anything. So in this case, we are only using one band, and we have this band between about 2K and about 9K. Let's just solo that up to hear what we're listening to. So just that kind of harsh range of the cymbals. So in this song, I've got the overhead sounding good for most of the track, but in the pre-chorus, the drummer is crashing on the ride cymbal, and the overheads are picking up a lot of that, and it's getting kind of harsh and nasty. So let me bypass this and we will listen to that. So yeah, when that crash ride comes in, it's just got a little too much of that nastiness. So now let's turn this on and see what it's doing. So you can see when he was just playing the regular crashes, the compressor wasn't really doing anything, but then when he went to the ride, it started ducking it down just a few decibels. Now we could have used an EQ to duck out this upper mid-range area, but then it would have been ducking it while the regular crashes and the hi-hats were playing, where it really didn't need that area cut. By using a multiband compressor, it's only ducking that area when it gets harsh. So let me play that one more time and then I'll bypass it, and you'll hear that little extra bit of harshness coming through. So again, not a huge difference, but just a little bit smoother there. And just real quick, I'm doing pretty much the same thing on my room mics. I'll just show you this because it might be an even clearer example of it. I'm at pretty much the same frequency range. It looks like I tweaked it a little bit. But since I'm compressing the heck out of these room mics, the cymbals can get pretty harsh. And again, I didn't want to just duck this area down with an EQ because there are some parts where the cymbals aren't playing and I want that extra brightness in the room mics there. So this is just controlling it when it's getting harsh. Let's take a listen. So yeah, there you can really see how much smoother that sounds. So for our third example, we're looking at our rhythm guitars. So here we've got our Wave C4, much more normal looking multiband compressor. And I'm using this preset I have here called Andy Sneap Guitar. I stumbled across these settings somewhere online years ago, something that Andy Sneap does. I might have tweaked it a little bit, I don't remember. But again, here we're just using one band between 65 Hertz and about 300 Hertz. So just the low end of the guitar. Let's solo that real quick, just so you can hear the range we're listening to. So now the concept of this, much like the cymbals we just looked at, most of the time these guitars are sounding good, and therefore you won't see this doing much of anything. But when the guitarist is palm muting, there's usually a lot more low end in palm mutes than open notes, and you can get that low frequency buildup that makes your mix a little bit muddy. But again, we don't want to just cut that area with EQ, because then when we're not palm muting, our guitars will sound thin. This is a way to get our guitars to sound consistent all the way through. So let's take a look at what it's doing. So yeah, at the beginning of that clip there, before he starts palm muting, you could see that this wasn't really moving at all, maybe just a tiny, tiny little bit. But then as soon as he starts the palm muting, it starts ducking it down, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 decibels or so. Let me bypass this and we'll listen again. And now with it in. So our guitars are just much more consistent with that in. So for our fourth example here, we're taking a look at our lead vocal track. So for the first time today, we're using all 4 bands spanning the entire frequency spectrum. So much like with our other examples, what we're going for here is tonal consistency. So without the multiband compressor, I'll notice that some words will have a little bit more low end or a little bit less low end, or one word will have a lot of upper mid-range and then the next word will have much less. So this is just a way to even each word out a little bit. So let's listen to this vocal line here and see if we can hear a little bit of that.
Don't dream with a broken heart, because dreams will always fall apart.
Okay, so one spot where I heard it pretty clearly was in the word always. So the first half of the word has quite a bit of mid-range presence, and then the second half, the ways, is quite a bit duller by comparison. Let me play that again and see if you can hear that.
Dreams will always fall apart.
And one more time, just really focus on that word always.
Dreams will always fall apart.
So hopefully you're hearing that. And now let's put our multiband compressor in.
Dreams will always fall apart.
So you can both see it on the graph here and hear it. It was ducking down this mid-range area here on the all, and then wasn't so much on the ways. And now that phrase sounds much more coherent to me. Let me play the whole line again, and yeah, just really focus on that word there.
Don't dream with a broken heart, because dreams will always fall apart.
And now without it.
Don't dream with a broken heart, because dreams will always fall apart.
And one more time with.
Don't dream with a broken heart, because dreams will always fall apart.
So yeah, and it's not just that word there. That was just the most obvious example I heard. But all the way through, it's much more consistent and it's controlling any areas that kind of poke out for one or two syllables. Also, kind of a bonus here is this top band here is basically just working as a de-esser for us. So it's helping to tame the sibilants a little bit, so our de-esser later down the line doesn't have to do as much work. And again, I know this example might not have been super obvious, but try to listen for that in your tracks. Some singers will have more of it and some singers will have less of it. So you'll have to see if your track needs it. And if you have the Wave C4, a great starting point for vocals is this vocal preset here. I don't use too many presets, but this is a really nice one for just subtly controlling the tonal differences of your vocal. So that's all the examples I have for you today. There are plenty more uses for multiband compressors, but they all pretty much follow the same concepts that we talked about in these 4 examples. And again, it's that they can be used to gain tonal consistency on a track. Anytime you have something that sounds good some of the time, but at other points in the song, they have an area in the frequency spectrum that's poking out too much or getting out of hand. Another place I use them a ton, but I didn't have to in this song, is acoustic guitars. You can use a band somewhere in the top end to control squeaks and finger noises and things like that. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and head on over to bettermixes.com to grab a free copy of my ultimate EQ cheat sheet.